The Case Management Steering Committee would like to present Ensuring the ISP is in the correct status in WAMS. An ISP should be complete in order to become effective. This is important because although an ISP is considered a living document, there are aspects that should be finalized before it is used as a guideline for direct care staff. An ISP that is not in completed status could also potentially be changed at any time without knowledge of all the parties involved in the planning process. The DD case management data taken directly from WAMS must be complete in order to successfully report information and ensure that it's consistent. The data pulled from WAMS includes ISPs in ISP complete or pending provider completion status that became effective within the reporting period, and any ISPs that are not in one of those two statuses is excluded from the data for that month or quarter. Due to the data reflecting only ISPs effective during the reporting period, if an ISP is not in one of those two statuses, it's not reflected in data for that reporting period or future reporting periods. This leads to aggregate data that isn't truly reflective of the efforts being made by support coordinators. Improvements to the ISP compliance data have been made in response to a November 2022 report, which prompted the addition of a new column on the data report to show the percent of ISPs placed in the proper status prior to their effective date. And this is a much more accurate representation of the ISPs being in the proper status. Additionally, the independent reviewer's 21st report noted that 78% of the ISPs were being reflected in data, as the other 22% were not in the correct status. The ISP compliance data report process is continuously improving. Initially, there were no compliance reports available, and then regular compliance reporting was available that was based on the status at the time of the data pool. Moving forward, the compliance reporting will be based on the status as of the effective date of the ISP. The following slides will explain this process. In order for an ISP to be moved into the correct status, a support coordinator must select Complete. This is normally done after each section has been noted as complete. This diagram demonstrates that the completed sections have a blue dot. But just getting the blue dots does not mean that the entire ISP is in the correct status. Once each section is complete and noted with a filled-in blue dot, the support coordinator must select Complete no later than the effective date of the ISP in order to be in compliance. Some support coordinators are hesitant to place ISPs into completed status. Let's take a look at the reasons that support coordinators and supervisors have reported for this. I am unable to update health or demographic information once the ISP is in complete status. While it's true that once in complete status, the shared planning section, which is Part 3, can no longer be revised, but Part 2 can be updated with details as needed, and the outcome revisions can still be made through Part 5. A provider that attended the meeting electronically may not have signed the ISP yet, and completing it makes it so they cannot. Support coordinators should encourage providers to sign the ISP Part 4 as soon as possible, either at or after the planning meeting. As a tip, if needed, you can sign a paper copy of the ISP that can be attached even after the ISP is completed. Providers also would sign their own Part 5. I have hesitated because I wanted to give other providers time to get things submitted. The Part 5 section does not lock when the ISP is placed in completed status, and providers can continue to work in Part 5. pending provider completion is an acceptable status for the support coordinator compliance on or before the effective date, but it is preferred for the ISP to be in ISP completed status. Sometimes the provider wants to change the verbiage of an outcome in Part 3. It is true that once in complete status, the shared planning section, which is Part 3, can no longer be revised directly, but outcome revisions must be completed through the provider's Part 5. There's guidance at the end of the slides on how to do this. An extra tip, make it very clear during the meeting, as well as prior to the meeting, in case the provider does not attend in person, that the Part 3 must be completed during the annual meeting, and the providers can adjust their Part 5 as needed afterwards. There is no current provider, so I cannot put the ISP into completed status. This topic has come up more recently due to lack of providers and COVID constraints. It hopefully is otherwise rare, and that would account for the small percentage of noncompliance that is acceptable. Remember, the target for this measure is 86%. I hesitate to complete if I am waiting to add DARS as a provider. Please remember, DARS is not a waiver provider. It would be appropriate for the support coordinator to list the referral under the support coordinator role and complete the ISP. Once the referral is completed, the support coordinator can note this in the support coordinator record and subsequent quarterlies. Providers may have multiple services for one individual, and I can't tell which service to select for each outcome because there's only a provider name. Providers should only be added one time to each ISP, even if there are multiple services or service locations. Please refer to the resources at the end of this presentation for more information. I may receive appended off and need to make a revision, and I can't if the ISP is in completed status. Waiting for service authorization approval up until the effective date is acceptable, but the ISP still must be placed into complete status at that point. As a tip, if it's in completed status, you can add or revise an outcome in Part 3. Refer to the additional resources at the end of this presentation for more information. Other reasons that support coordinators reported for not putting ISPs into completed statuses included, I forgot to hit complete. I did not go back and hit complete once the service authorization was approved. I'm afraid something is wrong and I'll have to start all over. In my EHR, it was complete, but once it transferred to WAMS, it was not. I left it open so I could check grammar and spelling and then forgot to hit complete. With turnover and new processes to learn, changing the status to completed is overlooked. Placing the ISP into the corrected status is an important final step in ISP submission, and it needs some sort of a look-behind process in addition to support coordinator training. Here are some other ways to do this. Have a calendar reminder set for the day before each ISP is to become effective to verify that it's complete. Have a second individual check the status of ISPs in WAMS on a scheduled basis to ensure that all ISPs are in the corrected status. Add the topic to weekly and monthly supervision topics and to-do lists for support coordinators and supervisors. If there's something of concern, like having the wrong name in a record that you can't fix, you can always put in a request to DBHDS to have this corrected. Imported ISPs will arrive in the proper status, pending provider completion, by default. If they are not, you need to check with your supervisor, with your IT department, or your EHR vendor and let them know that's not happening. Running out of time appeared to be a common theme when support coordinators were asked why they did not have ISPs in the correct status. The following timeline is recommended in the Support Coordinator Handbook and indicates the number of days prior to the ISP effective date to schedule or complete various steps of the planning process. Prior to the annual meeting, a draft of Parts 1 and 2 should be completed, and the annual ISP meeting is recommended to be scheduled at least 60 days prior to the ISP effective date. Service authorizations should be requested 30 days prior to the ISP effective date, and of course, the completed status or pending provider input should be marked as of or before the ISP effective date. Following these recommendations ensures that all parties have enough time to complete the information required. The ISP Compliance Data Report is loaded into Teams for each CSB on a regular basis. It's located in the team for your specific CSB, under the Case Management Data channel, under Files, and in the location shown below, the ISP Compliance Data folder. Please note that all support coordinators do not have access to Teams or to this information, but at least the DD director and/or the support coordinator supervisor at each CSB has access at this time. The most recent reports included the new measurement criteria. As you can see in the example below, there were two columns. One was percent compliance, which showed statewide percentage as of the data pull date. The second column was the percent compliance before the ISP effective date. So this showed the statewide percentage as of the ISP effective date. The data shown in the example is from fiscal year 2023, quarter 4. The new ISP compliance report has the following headers. Here is broken down to show the new reporting measure, the percentage of ISPs in the correct status as of the ISP effective date, as well as the measure previously used, ISPs in correct status as of the data pull date. The Case Management Steering Committee has been trending the data related to this measure and plans to continue to do so, as it's part of the 4 pillars of excellence. Improvement plans will be requested from providers that don't meet the 86% target for 2 consecutive quarters. It's important to note that beginning with the fiscal year 2025 quarter 1 data, July of 2024, that the updated data points are what will be used when requesting improvement plans. Providers should be mindful of the following timeline regarding the ISP compliance data. For quarter 3 of fiscal year 24, which is January through March, the data used will be the ISP in correct status as of the data pull. This is the data that will be used when requesting improvement plans for any CSB not meeting the 86% target for 2 consecutive quarters. For fiscal year 24, quarter 4, which is April through June of 24, ISP in correct status as of the data pull results will again be utilized when requesting improvement plans. However, the new data results will also be noted when reviewing data. Beginning fiscal year 25 quarter 1, which is July through September of 24, and moving forward, the ISP in correct status as of the ISP effective date data results will be utilized when requesting improvement plans. The target will remain at 86%, and improvement plans will be requested when a CSP does not meet the target in 2 consecutive quarters. Because ISP compliance data comes out quarterly, the Case Management Steering Committee thought it might be helpful to remind you how to look up ISP compliance between the reports that are provided. To view the ISP status, Once you log into WAMS, go to My Lists and then select Individual Support Plan. Once your individual support plan list query is shown, select the status Pending Support Coordinator Input. This will show any ISPs that are not in compliance at the date and time you are running the report. If you run the report tomorrow, you might get different results if a support coordinator marked an ISP as completed between today and tomorrow. Right now, there is no report to be able to determine ISP's compliance on a particular day. The maximum number of ISPs that will display for your search is 500. Selecting an effective date will give you any ISP that has an effective date from the date you selected and forward. Selecting the end date will give you any ISP that ended on that date or prior to the date that you selected. As a tip, remember that if the effective date you are selecting is prior to the day that you're actually running the report, all of the ISPs are out of compliance because you have selected Pending Support Coordinator Input, and the data is based on the day that you ran the report. For example, if you choose the date range in the example above on 3/2/23, all resulting ISPs would be out of compliance because they should have been in the appropriate status prior to the effective date of 3/1, but they were in Pending Support Coordinator Input status. Alternately, if you had chosen this same date range on 2/15/23 and you selected the effective date of 3/1/23, then there would still have been 2 weeks before these ISPs would be considered out of compliance because 3/1/23 hasn't happened yet. This gives you a way of being proactive, and you can go in, run your report based on those numbers, and see which ISPs are still in Pending Support Coordinator status prior to their effective date. This gives you ample time to correct those statuses. Once you run the report, the results are shown in a table with the headers that are shown here. You can sort by any of the headers assigned by clicking on the header, such as Assign Support Coordinator, and it will sort all the results by the coordinators. Remember again that this view only shows the first 500 entries, and they're not in any particular order until you try to sort them. So if you need a smaller sample or a larger sample, you can adjust your date ranges and refilter your results. This is an example of ISP dates resulting from the above date range, effective date 3/1/23 to end date 2/28/24. Remember that ISPs that get shown in your report are based on the selected status in yellow. In this circumstance, it is Pending Support Coordinator Input as of the day you run the report. This report was run on 4/1/23. That means that any of the ISPs that were effective prior to 4/1/23 were not in the correct status because their effective date was 3/1/23 and they're still showing as Pending Support Coordinator Input. These results also can demonstrate how you can be proactive in looking at the reports and determining if ISPs are in the correct ISP status. The report shows that there are several ISPs dated 4/23 and 5/23 that are also in Pending Support Coordinator Input status. Since the report was run on 4/1/23, they are not yet out of compliance, but the 2 that are effective in April are close to being out of compliance. This gives you the opportunity to take a look at those particular ISPs, see why they are not in the correct status, and change the status if they are ready to be changed. Remember that any ISP that was effective on or after the effective date and ended on or before the end date will be displayed in the table. And there is a limit of 500 rows. So if you need to narrow the scope of your search or increase it, you just need to change your end date. You can also sort the data by any of the other statuses that are available: pending support coordinator input, pending provider completion, ISP completed, or discarded ISPs. Please remember that while pending provider completion status may be appropriate for the compliance measure, ISP completed status is preferred for all ISPs prior to their effective date. Listed below are additional resources that you can find online regarding completing an ISP and WAMS. Please make sure to always refer to the most recent WAMS ISP user guide, currently version 3.4. This can be found under Training Manuals and WAMS. Some specific topics from the previous slides are noted below. Also refer to the job aids, tips and tricks, and did you know sections that are found in the same section under Training Manuals for other topics. One of the specific topics from previous slides is also noted below. To locate the additional resources located in WAMS, you must log into wamsvirginia.org using your credentials. Make sure that you're on the Home tab and scroll down to the Training Manuals, Webinars, and Frequently Asked Questions section. An additional resource noted in the previous slides was the Support Coordinator Developmental Disabilities Handbook. Below is the link to the Provider Network Supports webpage where this can be found. Also listed below is the recommendation directly from the handbook for your convenience. For the additional resources on the DBHDS website, go to www.dbhds.virginia.gov. Hover over the Offices tab at the top of the page and select Developmental Services. Scroll down on that page to the blue button for Office of Provider Network Supports, and after selecting it, select the hyperlink below it. You can also find many other resources at this location that are related to case management and developmental services that are not included in this presentation, and it's recommended that support coordinators have this page bookmarked. Again, we ask that you remember how important it is for the ISP to be in the correct status. It truly affects all of the DD case management data and quality improvement efforts statewide. If you have any other concerns or questions about this topic, please reach out to the Case Management Steering Committee. You can do so at the following email address: cmsc@dbhds.virginia.gov.